Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans.
And I listen to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast.
Indeed you are, people. You're listening to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. I'm your host, Mashal St. Patrick Hewitt, and with me as ever is my partner in crime, Santoki Nagilendran. Santoki, how you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, man, Mash. And it's been about a week now, Mash, since this independent report into West Indies' performances at the T20 World Cup has come out. And it's got not just the region talking. I think it's fair to say it's got world cricket media talking. You know, a lot of media publishers in Australia, India. I've seen them drop articles about, you know, this key nugget taken from the report, which, you know, is slightly dramatic, but the one that West Indies may cease to exist if things carry on going as they are. But we're here to kind of go into depth in it. And, you know, if you haven't already checked it out, we've interviewed Cricket West Indies CEO Johnny Grave about it from a Cricket West Indies point of view. But we're privileged today, Mash, to have the chair of the independent group into that report join us live on Caribbean Cricket Podcast.
Indeed we are. And it's good that we've got this individual on, because I always say, Santoki, that we pride ourselves on the Caribbean Cricket Podcast in going in depth into the kind of various machinations of West Indies cricket, from the boys to the girls, from the men to the women, from all the key stakeholders, and just trying to, I guess, dive a bit deeper and understand things a bit deeper than just going for the kind of clickbait headlines and kind of shock tactics of this person said this and that person said this and so on and so forth. So it's actually an honor to get our guest on today to go kind of have a bit of a deeper dive into this independent report, like you say. So without any further ado, let me bring our guest on, and it is, of course, Justice Patrick Thompson. I don't know if I'm supposed to say Patrick Thompson Jr., but when he comes on, he's going to let me know if I should be saying that or if it is actually just Justice Patrick Thompson. So I'll let him explain that in a second. Yes, Justice Patrick Thompson, Jr. or not Jr. How you doing?
Hi, evening, guys. Junior is my government name to use the Caribbean. So that's kind of why I have it there. But you could call me Patrick Thompson. Sadly, Patrick Thompson Sr. is not with us. So there's no debate, you know. I'm the last one. So there we have it.
Thank you for the clarity there, Patrick. And as Santoki rightly says, you are essentially the chair of, I guess, one of the most important documents in recent years with regards to West Indies cricket. We've had, I was about to say we've had a few tumultuous years, but West Indies cricket's had a tumultuous decade or decade plus of cricket. But certainly in the last 2 years, given the kind of consecutive poor performances within the T20 World Cup, both in 2021 and 2022, President Skerritt had said that they wanted to kind of have a proper deep dive report into what went wrong and what are the wider things to kind of take into consideration with regards to West Indies cricket. And I guess first things first, and where I'd like to start is actually, let's just start with you, the individual, first, before we even get to the report itself per se. When the offer came to you, how did the offer come to you? How did you actually get involved in this? And was there a part of you which thought, this is a big piece of work to do, like, or did you kind of relish the opportunity to get involved in this?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It was both of those things. I certainly relished the opportunity to be involved in West Indies cricket in any way. And yeah, it was a big piece of work to take on at the end of the year when, you know, we have a lot to do, I guess, in my day job. But I think passion projects, you know, you make time for what's important. And I was able to sort of do this in the evenings while doing all the things that my day job entails during the day. How it came to me, I think it's I had done something for, I think it was for Leeward Islands Cricket. They were looking to revamp the articles. There was some legal thing. They formed a committee to look at the articles of incorporation or something of that sort. And I think out of that review, I think someone mentioned my name and they asked me, and I said, sure, I'd love to be a part of it. So here
I am. And when you kind of, I guess you kind of dive into it, and from the very beginning, how did your but how did you try and bring kind of your expertise within your own field of work into commissioning this kind of report? What were the specific kind of expertise that you felt you could bring to proceedings here? And I say this with the greatest of respects. Take the cricket away from it for a second, because at the end of the day, a report's a report in some senses. What were some of the elements you were trying to? It could have been about football, it could have been about basketball, whatever. So what were you bringing to it in particular, given kind of your skill set?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I have to say that was the first thing that crossed my mind when I was asked to do this. Like, what could I have to say to Brian Lara, my sort of childhood hero, and Mickey Arthur, a successful cricket coach? I have very little to say to them on cricket, but I think my role was to organize the structure of the information that we collect, how we collect it, what that information would look like, and then once we received it, to put it into a digestible format. So that was my fundamental task. And I have to say, in my day job, we try to organize, certainly for my part, I try to organize my thoughts in a chronological fashion. I find that that's always a good starting point. And if you've read the report, you'll see that it tries to work chronologically, that the reason why we came to be eliminated was because we were eliminated from the 2021 World Cup, which meant we had to qualify for the 22. So once you have that chronological background, then it's kind of easier to put things into context. You pick a starting point, and then you kind of work your way from that starting point outwards. And then it was just a matter of deciding who was going to do what. And I think we decided to sort of draft questions to the players, and Brian decided to interview. I think we thought it best that Brian would be the one to win the confidence of the players. So he interviewed all of the players and reported back. And then I think Mickey was going to interview the coach or coaches, but of course, and I would have to interview the management and West Indies management and the other stakeholders. So that's pretty much how we sort of divided up the work between the three of us.
In a relatively short space of time, as you said, you managed to interview so many people, Phil Simmons, his whole backroom staff, even going down to the team masseuse, Cricket West Indies directors, most of the players in that World Cup squad. If you could say, like, generally, what was the sort of feedback in terms of these interviews? Were people happy to talk? Was there willingness to do this for the betterment of West Indies cricket? Did you find any reluctance? What was the general sort of consensus?
Yeah, it was fantastic. I have to say it was a fantastic experience. I make no bones to say that Cricket West Indies is served by a number of good professionals who have West Indies cricket best interests at heart. And I think it was very easy for them to talk to me because it's very easy, I guess, to talk to someone who's not your boss about your boss, if that makes sense. You could kind of unburden yourself to a stranger in a way that you wouldn't unburden yourself to someone from management. So it's very easy to build a rapport and chat with the backroom staff. I had the privilege of interviewing Nicholas Puran on December 31st, and that was an excellent, free-flowing, wide-ranging conversation of a kind that I don't think he would have had if, say, it were with the president or any of the executives. But here I am as a stranger, a relative stranger to him, and he felt comfortably enough to speak to me. And I guess that's one of the skills I try to bring to the table. In your day job, you try to make witnesses and lawyers as comfortable as possible to do their jobs, to ask their questions and so on. So I think that was a strength that assisted us in the work that we did.
It's interesting you say there. I mean, you've just referenced Puran, and before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of some of the findings of the report and this, that, and the other, one of the things that I think I picked out, and I guess I want your take on it, is I guess one of the laziest things that people say about West Indies cricket, and this is within both the region, outside of the region, fans of other teams, but who still, I guess, pay close attention to the West Indies, is there's a myth that players don't care, or there's no real vested interest in trying to make West Indies cricket better again, and so on and so forth. And I guess in many ways you could say, well, have I given the answer for you with this question? But what did you pick out? Was there a sense of that, or was it quite the opposite for you, that actually everyone recognizes that there is this entity known as West Indies cricket, and whilst there may be different ways and methods that people might believe in, that they all still actually want the central thing of West Indies cricket to be better?
Yeah, that's I suppose you gave me the answer initially, but I have to say my interview with Andrew Russell is what I think really, I suppose, shook or dispelled that myth from my mind. It's very clear that Andrew Russell cares. I know some of your listeners might be surprised to hear that, because of course there's a perception that he's a sort of T20, pirate for hire, played wherever for whoever pays him. But I have to tell you that he really cares about West Indies cricket. That was the impression I got from my interactions with him. Nicholas Puran also cares, and Brian Lara confirmed that the players cared and were really, really affected by their poor performance at the T20 World Cup. So that the idea that they sort of don't really care and they're happy to use your podcast expression to collect these bags of money all around the world is incorrect. They really do care. But I think there's a disconnect between the administration and the players and their perception of each other and how they ought to work together to harness the best interests of West Indies cricket.
It's interesting. It's interesting because if we go into the actual report, within the second point, you've already made a reference to Shimron Hetmyer not being available in that World Cup campaign. Obviously, one player can't affect a whole team's World Cup performances, but did you get a general sense from the interviews and speaking to people that just how big a blow it was to not have Shimron Hetmyer? How much did it affect the team and to sort of not have him around the setup?
Right. So at the outset, I have to say the players accepted that, look, they just had to get on with Hetmyer not being there. So the players didn't say, well, the reason why we did so badly is because Hetty wasn't there. They simply said to a man that, look, Hetty had a role in our planning, in our preparation. Players, coaches, they all accepted that he had a role. He was going to bat at a particular position. He's one of our better players against spin. It's no secret that spin, was our undoing at this World Cup. So in that sense, I guess, tactically, there was a value to him that could not easily have been replaced. And they were at pains to say, look, we just had to get on with it. Everyone knows that he sort of didn't make it at a very late stage. Plans were already in place. He was supposed to join them, and then they had to adjust. But of course, that doesn't explain their poor performance. The players didn't say that's why they didn't do well, but it's just a matter of math. I mean, Shimron Hetmyer has, 500s in one-day cricket? You'll tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm certain that he has as many hundreds as the batting unit combined at the T20 World Cup. So then it's just math. I mean, just look at the averages and see what he would have added to the team, and that essentially is what they say they missed.
Indeed, and it is 5. Your knowledge is your knowledge is spot on. He's got 5 ODI centuries, and I guess Santoki's raised that point, which comes early in the report. But in essence, and you spoke about the kind of chronological layout of the report. But what whose decision was it to, I'm assuming it's yours, but maybe it was something you all came together to decide to go, right, what are the short-term solutions? What are the medium-term? What are the long-term? Was it a case of everything was put together as evidence, and then you sat down as three and said, right, how do Cricket West Indies go about changing any of this or implementing things? How did you get to the short, medium, long term? Or did you just say, well, we have to have some kind of smart related targets and performance indicators and so on and so forth?
No, I think and I suppose this is where my day job comes into play. You keep an eye, you always keep an eye on matters as they're developing. And in each consultation, you keep seeing these particular themes. So you talk to the players and you see themes. You see Cricket West Indies people and you get their views. So it's very clear that the priority, as it were, is building back the relationship. And then, of course, you need to do things in the medium term. And then, of course, you need to do things in the long term, because, of course, everything is framed against the backdrop of the 2024 World Cup. We wouldn't have had enough time to say, right, make these plans. No, there are no quick fixes in international sport, but there are things you can do at varying times with one eye on a long-term goal that you can try to remedy the situation that we face. So I guess the responsibility was mine to sort of organize it in that sort of chronological way, because I guess that's the nature of the training, to try and put things across in as digestible a fashion as possible, with an emphasis on the short-term recommendations being the things that could happen in a short time that could perhaps do the greatest good, if that makes sense. So you build a relationship and then you build outwards from there, essentially, is what we decided to do.
Interesting. And then just before Santoki comes up again, because the relationship, I think it's one of the first few points in the short-term recommendations is about convening like a meeting, like almost like a retreat between the players and the kind of, I guess, management, if you want to use that term. But what was the thing that made you, I'm trying to think of the right question here. Was it that you picked up that, when we say distrust, was it that you picked up the players' perception and management's perception of things, as opposed to a clearly identified, we think this about them, they think this about us, and so on and so forth? Or was it more for you about misdiagnosed perception of situations which can only be resolved by everyone sitting in the room and actually talking clearly to each other?
The latter. I have to say, it was an idea that kept emerging because the consultation sort of happened over the November-December period. So that with each consultation, you got more information. And the consultations coming as they did meant that you spoke with perhaps a player one day, and then management another day, and someone from Cricket West Indies another day. So that you keep getting these different perspectives, but you come back to that central theme. So on the one hand, I'm hearing this from the players, and on the other hand, I'm hearing this from management. And it suggests more and more as the consultations went on that sort of round table meeting was necessary. And I want to say, I can't remember which player, and I don't want to use the word former player. We have former player for Carlos Brathwaite, but of course he hasn't retired. That was just a typo on our part. I believe it's either Carlos or Darren that suggested it. I'd have to check my notes to tell you for sure. But someone in their consultation with Mickey had said, we ought to have a meeting. And that dovetailed nicely with our thoughts that, look, yeah, we ought to have a meeting. So I think we flagged the need for a meeting as a thing. And then when we spoke with either Carlos or Darren, I was like, oh, yeah, we really should have a meeting. Because here you have a stakeholder saying the same thing that we're thinking about.
Yeah, it emphasizes in the report that from this meeting, there should be a clear agreement on strength and conditioning standards, player availability and needs. Just in terms of strength and conditioning, Cricket West Indies have always said the fitness criteria to make the squad has been clear and communicated with the players. We've seen in recent times Shimron Hetmyer and Evan Lewis fail the fitness criteria and not make West Indies squads. Just from speaking to the players, did you get the sense that the fitness standards and strength and conditioning standards weren't as clear as Cricket West Indies had made out? There'd been sort of a lack of communication in terms of what was needed to reach the standard of making the West Indies team?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the standard was clear, but I'm not sure if the players felt that the standard was being, I guess, properly implemented, if I could use that word, because it seemed to the players that they're aware of the standard, but then of course they're playing these other matches against their peers. And I think the players' view was that there needed to be more emphasis from Cricket West Indies on what they call cricket fitness, while Cricket West Indies might be focused on, I suppose, the minimum standard for I think it's what's it called, the beep test, where you have to get 40 or whatever it was. There's a disconnect happening there, because what appears to have been happening is, of course, if you set a minimum benchmark, then the players, I think, just try to attain that benchmark instead of trying to surpass the benchmark. So there's a disconnect. I think you need more than just a sort of pass mark, a pass-fail mark, but you need a way to evaluate the players in their home countries and continually monitor them with an agreed standard in place. I know that that's a lot of words, but to simply say, all right, you have to hit this particular score as a cutoff did not seem to be working effectively for the players. And I believe in our consultations, Cricket West Indies is also, or was in the process of taking a look at that. So it's not as clear, I suppose, as it ought to be on the strength and conditioning side of things.
I must at this juncture go to possibly the most difficult issue to raise, and I take you back to the press conference, Patrick, which yourself and Ricky Skerritt held with the media, assorted media around the region. And I think one of the big points raised in the report, and at the press conference, Ricky answered this one, but I do want to see what your take on it is. One of the big kind of aspects of the report relates to things that territorial boards need to do. Now, maybe in some ways, I'm trying to get you to answer this. Yes, I know obviously you've chaired the report, but how do... I'm just gonna throw the question to you, and you can answer it however you want to answer it. You may even say, you know what, I have to pass this one. How would you envisage lots of these changes taking place, given we have a unique system in the Caribbean as compared to our peers in international cricket? So whether it be some of the short term, whether it be some of the medium, or whether it even be some of the long term, the fact we have a territorial system means there has to be great symbiosis between. It's not just one organization. We're asking for a lot of people and a lot of figureheads and a lot of people to have to agree on a kind of singular goal.
Mm-hmm.
And in putting the report together, did you, from an outside perspective coming in, kind of see that, wow, this is a complex web to try and there's a lot of moving parts. How do you envisage those moving parts moving in sync? I've given you a lot there to try and
No, I follow. I mean, you're asking, I guess, the G word, if I could call it that. This is really about the G word, which I guess in West Indies cricket is analogous to the F word in regular speech. You know, no one wants to talk about governance, but it's at the center of making any substantial change in our cricket structure. Let me say, I think I appreciate the complexity of the web, but I have to say it's largely a matter of perception. I think we stay in our islands and countries, even though in some of the islands you can see your neighboring island. And there's just little cooperation of the kind that ought to exist, to share resources, to share knowledge, and so on. But I'm optimistic that if you see more of the, I think we use the word cross-pollination, that is to say a small but important change would be for the territorial boards to present at the Cricket West Indies annual meeting. I was shocked to learn that that isn't the way that it worked. Apparently, Cricket West Indies presents and the territorial board director simply listen. It ought to be both ways. You know what I mean? Once you can get the territorial boards feeling like they too have to account financially and for what they do re cricket development, then I think there's real hope for the sort of changes that Cricket West Indies recognizes it needs in the varying governance reports. I mean, that's the short answer. They're never going to do the changes overnight. If you try and ram a governance change down the mouths of Cricket West Indies stakeholders, it's never going to happen overnight because we've seen all of these governance reports. But if you give them small, palatable bites, and I want to say that I think there's a change in attitude at the territorial board level. The CEOs, for instance, seem to have more cooperation and understanding among each other. And I think that bodes well for the ultimate structure of Cricket West Indies. So I'm optimistic that we will see the change, even with these varying moving parts. Because I have to say, I mean, I note that as a challenge, when I consulted with the CEOs of the territorial boards, I said to them, look, why aren't you guys organizing more cricket among yourselves? You don't need Cricket West Indies to tell you that, you know, Grenada Barbados could organize a tournament, or Antigua Nevis, you know, Leewards, Windwards, Dominica, Antigua could. You can organize your own tournament outside of the auspices of Cricket West Indies without the need for waiting for Cricket West Indies to tell you, well, we have this tournament or that tournament. So that if you see more of that sort of activity, then I think that bodes really, really well for our cricket going forward. So yeah, it's complex. Yeah, it's going to take a while, but I'm optimistic that there are people who are interested in making the change.
I think another complex aspect is the sort of developing West Indies cricket while trying to balance the modern cricketing landscape. And obviously, I think a fundamental point of the report is West Indies did not perform at the World Cup because they simply weren't prepared for Australian conditions. And part of this reason was twofold. One being the CPL was taking place, and that didn't prepare them adequately, the players, for Australia. And also the simple fact that West Indies aren't an attractive proposition for Australia in terms of holding a longer white ball series, which didn't give them preparation in those conditions. So a lot of it is about sort of balancing the modern landscape. One idea which you suggested, and a lot of fans have talked about for years now, has been getting more white ball only players into the Test cricket arena. So Pooran, Evan Lewis, Odean Smith, you've recommended should play Test cricket. It'd be interesting to know, and a lot of fans would want to know, talking to the players firstly, was there a desire from the likes of Pooran and Evan Lewis to play Test cricket? And secondly, talking to stakeholders in Cricket West Indies and the coaching staff, how did they come up with any plans or propositions as to how you get these players in the Test ball arena?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question, Satoki. And you hit the nail on the head. Pooran, for instance, because I asked him specifically, you know, would he be interested? And he said yes. He reminded me, and I suppose I'd forgotten about this, that he had top scored. He made 69 not out for West Indies in a red ball match against New Zealand when we were on tour in 2019, 2020, I want to say. So it's clear that he played, but he wasn't selected for the Test match that followed that first class match in New Zealand. So it's not a matter of the players not wanting to play. And everyone agrees, the director of cricket, the batting coach, the bowling coach, the head coach, the players themselves, they all agree that red ball cricket is imperative to develop white ball skills. You have to do it that way. I think somebody in the consultations referred to, like Kane Williamson. Kane Williamson had made a name for himself as a red ball player before he started doing anything remotely half decent in white ball cricket. So you have a template, as it were, for success. The players are willing. I hope my answer doesn't sound like we're throwing the selectors under the bus, but it seems to me there's a need for a rethink in terms of, and this is my view, I don't presume to speak for Brian and Mickey, but we certainly signal that everyone is agreed that the players would benefit from playing more red ball cricket. I mean, that there's no nice way to say that. And again, I'm going to refer to a recent example. You have, for instance, Kyle Mayers is currently playing in the warm-up match against Zimbabwe. But a week or two ago, Kyle Mayers was in South Africa playing white ball cricket. Nicholas Pooran is playing, I think, in the UAE T20 League. So you can't tell me it's impossible for a player who was playing white ball the week before to be parachuted into a red ball team. I guess the big question, and it's not a question for me or for the report, is why we have that clear distinction. Because it's simple math. I'm sure Kyle Mayers was paid on a pro rata basis for the matches he played in South Africa in that white ball league. And then he goes into the West Indies red ball team. Nobody's saying Kyle Mayers had to come back to the Caribbean to play a first-class match and then go to the Zimbabwe. It's just common sense. And that's why we said, and critically, to come back to the quote, that's why we said our best 11 ought to be the mandate from Cricket West Indies. Look around, pick up best 11. Batsmen, bowlers, wicket keepers, and the answers are clear. It's just a matter of picking them. And as a recommendation, we say pick them and then find a time frame for them, the players, to say, look, we're making ourselves available or we're not making ourselves available, so that the onus is on them. I know that might sound slightly utopian, and perhaps, I hope the chair of selectors doesn't come for me if he listens to this podcast, but it seemed to us as a group that there has to be a clear push towards upskilling our white ball players by making them play as much red ball cricket as possible. A series against Zimbabwe is a massive opportunity to let men play. I can't think, and there's no slot in Zimbabwe, but I cannot think of a better team that we would be able to tour at, I don't want to say low stakes, but relatively low stakes, with an opportunity to blood players and get players playing some form of test cricket to see what they're about, than perhaps Zimbabwe. I mean, I don't know. Pakistan, Sri Lanka, they all offer different challenges, but Zimbabwe is just like right there. It's not like Ireland where it's green and the ball will move around. You have this golden opportunity, and I guess you can tell I'm disappointed that I think we missed a chance to really see what some of these players could do.
It can't be more emphatic than what you've just said.
Sorry.
But I just want to throw the cat amongst the pigeons even further, and just say that we've had several reports written in West Indies cricket before. Lucky report, Patterson report, Webby report. Now some of them have seen things implemented. I think the PKF report had, the finance report had some key things implemented. Mm-hmm. This report that was carried out with yourself, Brian and Mickey, has given clear guidelines, clear outlines of what needs to be done. Ricky Skerritt obviously has said that his intention, and I think he's even said that some of these implementations have already started. But he's also going to leave office within the next 2 months. I think I already know the answer, but I'm asking you anyways. What happens if nothing gets done? And what happens if a year from now, after all this painstaking work, you look and you realize that essentially none of the major changes that yourself, Brian, and Mick had kind of suggested were really implemented? Now, you're probably going to say to me, well, the team will continue to struggle. But I guess I don't mean you to answer it that way. I more mean it, how would you feel? Because there's people who've been in your position before who've put painstaking hours of work into something only to see the report gather dust on a shelf as if it was never written in the first place. So have you considered that possibility?
Of course, I think that's the last line in the report. We say, look, I hope it's not in some dusty drawer, collecting cobwebs or something. But those are matters beyond our control. I mean, I suppose if they don't take on the report and its recommendations, then I guess they'll ask somebody else to write a report about our poor performance in other World Cups to come. They'll just keep commissioning reports and decide what to do with it. But no, levity aside, I think me personally, no, I'm not going to be too upset if it doesn't happen. I think I'm pragmatic enough to realize that that's just the nature of the business. We can't control who will be our next president. And you asked us to do a job, we did the job. What you decide to do is entirely a matter for you. The report speaks for itself. And if in a year time, I suppose whoever is at the helm is asked to come on this podcast and explain, well, here are these recommendations, why won't they implement it? Then that would be a matter for them. But I can't worry about things that I cannot control. I see myself simply as a fan of West Indies cricket, and I will continue to do all I can to assist West Indies cricket in any way possible.
Well, I guess to wrap up, you mentioned there briefly the next T20 World Cup. That's obviously being hosted by the West Indies jointly with the USA. In terms of performance at that World Cup, just sort of your own personal opinion or speaking to stakeholders, just how big is that tournament for the region in terms of, West Indies' long-term future as an entity, I guess, and their success? How big is this 2024 T20 World Cup in your opinion?
It's massive. That's why we framed it as something to work towards. In our view, it's as big as, in relative terms, it's as, I don't know if either you were in the West Indies or were following the 2007 World Cup, but it's as big in 2024 as the 2007 World Cup was. The only difference is we're not building the sort of stadia that we needed to build in and trying to sort out all these issues with CARICOM to make it a reality, because we have experience of hosting that sort of event. But for our cricket, I think it's far more important that we are able to feel a competitive team that can make a real difference to our prospects going forward. Because anything, I would venture to say, anything less than a semi-final berth in our own World Cup, in our own conditions, that is a disaster as far as West Indies fans are concerned. That has to be, in my view, the driving focus for the director of cricket and the president. They have to be saying, look, we hope to get into the semi-finals of the 2024 World Cup so that we could get his fans back in, so we could start saying, look, we have a team, we have a team that people want to see and play and be successful. If that isn't the goal a year and a half out, then like we say, maybe it's time, as Chris Daring said, to wrap it up, because you have to have these sort of plans. We're battling for our life, and I'm not indulging in dramatics, but we can't continue to sustain these losses and shifting further and further back into irrelevance. They're small things, but I think it's important. Just look, for instance, at the South Africa. South Africa played 3 tests against Australia. We played 2. 10, 15 years ago, there's a chance we would have played 5 tests against Australia, and somebody else would have been fighting to play the other 2 tests. So that incrementally, we're shifting into irrelevance. So that, for instance, we could have had 3 tests against Australia, and South Africa could have had 2. But we're down to 2 now. So what else is left after you start chipping away? We're very close to what I would say is a crisis stage. Because, of course, we no longer have a seat at the big table. We're not calling the shots in world cricket. So then we're relegated to sort of be playing at the whims and fancies of other teams. I think you guys on this podcast pointed out England not coming to the West Indies for another 3 or 4 years for any kind of red ball cricket like us. That's a massive loss. When we were younger, England was here every other year. Australia was here every other year. So that we can't continue to sustain our existence because everyone knows the TV revenues is what drives the game. If we're not playing and we're not able to generate those revenues, then the game will die, plain and simple. So it's for the state, it's for the bigger heads, as it were, to get their plans in a row, and I'm sure they're working assiduously to get their plans in a row for 2024. And the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. We hope to all be alive and watch it on telly or in person and see what we do.
Santoki, did you hear what Patrick said there? Patrick said semi-finals minimum. These times, I'm thinking just win 2 games. That's all I'm thinking about. They'll just win 2 games.
Have to. For our World Cup, have to beat Saints. Have to. In our conditions, that has to be the goal. Whether it's attained is another story, but that has to be the goal. Like, who do we want? It's for us to put it together.
I mean, certainly one thing I would say is that if one of the arguments given was that we weren't properly prepared for Australian conditions, there can't be any argument about not being prepared for our own conditions in a home World Cup, and where we have CPL 2023 CPL. In fact, no, the World Cup will come before CPL 2024, but there can't be any excuses about not playing in conditions that we aren't familiar with. So I think that's certainly out of the window. Listen, Patrick, we're gonna bring this one to a close. This was always intended to be kind of we didn't want to go complete. If we wanted to go complete into the report, we'll be here for another 2.5 hours minimum, because there's so much in the report itself. And what I would say to people listening to this, if you're yet to read the report on YouTube, and if you're listening on the podcast platform of your choice, I will put the link to the report in the description below. So do go and read the full report, because there's a lot more to it as well that we haven't even discussed with Patrick in this conversation. So do go and kind of get a grasp of the full report. Patrick, we have one final question which we ask all of our guests when they come on the show. And despite you not being a professional cricketer or a former professional cricketer, you still have to answer it all the same. What is the thing is, you may not be able to answer because I don't know how many cricket grounds you've managed to get in the region. What is your favourite ground to watch cricket in within the Caribbean? And you're not allowed to say your own home territory.
Right. That's a good question, because I've seen cricket at Kensington Oval, Savannah Park, Viv Richards Stadium in Antigua, the ground in St. Kitts, the ground in Grenada, where I'm from. And I have to say, well, I can't choose Grenada, so I have to say my next favorite place to watch cricket is probably Warner Park in St. Kitts. I have a lot of fun memories. I was fortunate enough to watch large parts of the 2021 CPL, and the St. Kitts and Nevis Patriots won that CPL. So that was an awesome experience to watch large parts of that, because as you both know, the CPL was held in St. Kitts. So I had a chance to essentially watch lots of double and triple headers once I'd finished my duties, because we were all inside at the time because of the pandemic. So only vaccinated persons were able to go. Yeah, I would have to say, based on that experience, I think Warner Park in St. Kitts, the atmosphere on that day was electric. And I'm hoping that they get a quarterfinal or a semi-final or something, or even the final for the 2024 World Cup. That'd be the icing on the cake.
Awesome. One day Grenada may well get a CPL franchise. Yeah, you never. I keep pushing for CPL to give them one, but you never know.
That's for the government. So we know those ones.
And finally, although I said that was the final question, finally, your favorite West Indian cricketer of all time and why?
That's an easy one. Brian Lara. working on this.
No, hold on.
Okay.
Just because we did the report, you can't say Brian Lara, you know.
No. That's inevitable. I mean, I can tell you a very personal anecdote. It's when I was growing up, Brian Lara was well, I had dreams. I used to bat left-handed just like him. So I suppose he was right-handed who batted left-handed just like me. And you know, young boys in the Caribbean, you all have dreams and so on. And Brian was, I suppose, the epitome of batsmanship for me. I told him at the end of the consultations, because when I told my friends that I was being asked to do this work, at least 3 of them said to me, listen, you can't just start fanboying over Brian. You're here to do work on this committee. So any comments you have for him, you have to tell him at the tail end of your work. So I was very pleased to say to him, look, I've seen basically all your test hundreds. I've missed countless hours of school to watch. I certainly remember staying home from school to watch his 153 against Australia in 99, in March 99 against Australia in Barbados. I stayed home from school. I mean, I was in A-level prep at the time, and I stayed home from school and watch every single ball at our innings. And I watched the 213 because I was made over Saturday into Sunday, I believe so. I mean, yeah, my parents, if they were alive, would say that me cheering for Brian Lara cost them a lot of sleep. You know what I mean? They would have heard me shouting at the television or at the radio over countless hours, and that is my favorite Australia. I mean, that's a no-brainer. That's a no-brainer.
Okay, well, you've put a compelling argument together that I cannot possibly disagree with. Santoki, I'm going to let you wrap this one up.
Yeah, no, Patrick Thompson, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show this evening to kind of share your insights. And we hope, you know, for the benefit of West Indies cricket, that the recommendations in your report are implemented. Otherwise, you know, it's going to be an unprecedented cuss out in 2024 when if we don't make those semi-finals. But Patrick, thank you so much for coming on and giving up your time.
Yep. Thanks, gents. It was a pleasure. I look forward to following your podcast and hopefully with some success. Hopefully I'll be hearing, you know, stories of success on the podcast instead of more cuss outs. Let's see what the future holds.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there's no better way to finish that episode. You've been listening to another episode of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Thank you and good night.
We rule the cricket world. Now the rule seems coming.
Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans.